The Lomo LC-A Plus camera made by Lomography has a pretty long history. Originally made by Lomo, which was basically an acronym for Leningrad Optics and Mechanics Association. That was in Leningrad, which became St Petersburg after the fall of the Soviet Union. This camera is known for its, mainly known for its lens, the Minitar 1 32mm f2.8. I've talked about the separate Leica M mount lens earlier. It's got a really special rendering. On this camera, it's not a rangefinder, so basically the focus is on 4 distances: infinity, 3 meters, 1.5 meters, and 0.8 meters. You can have the aperture set on the other side. You have the ISO settings here. Quite limited ergonomics camera, which is great for street photography. You have the shutter button here. If you turn it on, you have a small LED telling you exposition and giving you a few different information inside. And underneath the basic, the button for the rewind of the film, the battery compartment, and yeah, nothing really extravagant, but a really well made camera. Basically, it was produced between 1984 and 1994, then was taken over by a company which was named Lomographic Society International, which is now Lomography, produced between 1995 and 2005, and finally the LC-A Plus, this model, came out from 2006 and is still sold. So yeah, not much more. As I said, you can open the camera in a very traditional way, and yeah, really interesting camera to use. Let's go look at a few examples. Okay, so once we put this camera to the test, the first thing we see, I tested it here with 2 films, one black and white and one color. The color was a Kodak Color Plus 200, also known as Kodak Color 200, and the black and white film was Fomapan 400. Those 2 first images, as we can see, this rather traditional field of view, more on the open side with the 32mm f2.8, is kind of interesting. Having this control of focus with 4 positions, basically 0.8, 1.53 and infinity, all in meters, makes it rather simple to use and quite intuitive. Aperture can be controlled, but I did all those pictures in auto mode because it's basically you don't control the speed of the aperture of the exposition. So I left it in auto. But yeah, the first things we see on those 2 pictures is the exposition is rather good. The detail is good too. The lens does a pretty good job. It's a little bit soft, but overall a pretty good rendering in those 2 otherwise non-interesting pictures, in my opinion. Going to black and white. Again, exposition is good, but here we can definitely see one of the main characteristics of the lens. It's going to render in pincushion. It's going to be concave rendering. So if you're looking for precise vertical or horizontal straight lines, that's probably not a good camera for you, or actually is not a good lens. I've done a separate review of the lens Lomography makes for Leica M compatible cameras, which is basically the same lens. But here with this Fomapan 400 film, exposition's really good. Again, 2 other pictures. We can really see the character coming out of it. It's a bit old school, but quite dreamy, still precise. Yeah, here with quite contrasty situations, you can see that exposition's good, and yeah, not much to say. We really are starting to see the character of this lens coming out. If we go back to color, again, you really shouldn't be bothered by the concave creativity of the rendering, this kind of circular distortion of vertical and horizontal lines. If you're not, as we can see, it's pretty strong on those two pictures. In color rendering is good too. Rather old school, but lots of character. And going back to good black and white here, what really peaks out is the ease of use. Focus is overall not a problem. It wasn't a problem for me. Remember, it's not going to be precise, but the 4 positions are rather easy to use, and you have to think about it differently when you take the picture. Wasn't very sure if the intermediary positions between the clicks were doing something, probably, but I didn't use it as such. I only used the 4 positions, focal positions. Here, those 2 pictures in color, same place as the pictures before in black and white. That's in Reykjavik. It's a frozen lake, partially frozen lake. Not the same day, however, I believe. But as you can see, again, exposition is good in auto mode. No real problems here. The picture on the right reveals something from this lens, which wasn't really a problem in auto mode because probably it's never fully open, or I don't have as much chances of pushing the lens to its limits. But we can see that there's some flares and ghost images that are circular. Not very troubling on this picture, but beware. On my test of the separate lens, I really had a lot of those. But obviously I was pushing it way further because of the digital sensor. But yeah, that's a characteristic of this lens. It's going to do some circular flares, and you might not like this. But again, 2 pictures here. I'm in low lights or by night. You can see both in black and white and color. It's metering is good even at slow shutter speeds, and the camera feels really stable enough even at slow speeds, and it's discrete. Color feels a bit harsher, but maybe you will want to use other films. There's a small kinetic blur on the right picture, but it's really controllable with this 32mm lens and the weight it stands in your hand. Here again, 2 pictures. Really easy to handle, practical. The lens cover system that turns the camera on and off is also great. Covers both the lens and the viewfinder lens. A good protection, easy to handle. Yeah, UX is really the user interface experience is good, and it feels pretty stable in the hand. Even with this picture on the right, where I took it out of my pocket last minute, and it's a really slow speed, as you can see, with the motion blur on the bus behind. So a good experience once you get used to the camera. Here are 2 other pictures. It's really great at rendering, at conveying the feel of a scene in the limits of its characteristic rendering. It's dreamy. It's definitely all dreamy and old school, but works great. And yeah, I put 3 pictures here. I don't really know what happened here, but I probably touched the button and got it out of auto mode, because it's basically my last 8 to 10 pictures on the color film. That's color film. And it was definitely underexposed, so yeah, I compensated in post-prod. But yeah, the rendering is still interesting. I kind of liked what came out of it, and I'm actually going to experiment a bit more with the manual settings of it. I'm not fully certain that that was the problem, but as it was really stable with both films and I ended up with a color film, I have no other explanation for that weird glimpse problem I had at the end of the film. But overall, a really interesting camera, nice to use once you get used to it, and yeah, great experience. So basically, yeah, it's a very interesting camera. In its practical use, it's super compact. It's ergonomically, it feels good. You get used to this focusing mechanism and the way it feeds back quite fast. It's rapidly in your pocket, rapidly out. I've used it mostly full aperture, which was probably maybe a little bit of a mistake because of the flaring at wider apertures, but It's yeah, the mechanism to close the lens also is great. Works great. Very, very compact. Nothing really unusual from this kind of cameras, but it's got a very particular character with its lens, and the ergonomics are great. Yeah, let's say that. So yeah, and it's still made, so that's something important if you want to get it new.